Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is Navigating Your Legal Accounts Payable, Bills and Beyond. Speaking today will be Rick Cabra, CEO of Cosmolex, and Erica Bursler, Director of Strategic Communications at Cosmolex. Rick Cabra is the CEO of Cosmolex Cloud, a web-based law practice management system designed for small law firms. Rick has a PhD in electrical engineering and has over 12 years of experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small law firms. Rick is the co-author of the book Law Firm Accounting Demystified, has given hundreds of seminars, and has published numerous articles on legal technologies related to law office management, cloud computing, business and trust accounting, compliance issues, and legal billing. Rick's passion is helping attorneys use technology to simplify their law firm operations. Under his watch, the Cosmolex platform has grown to include practice management, billing, business accounting, and trust accounting functions, and is being used by small law firms across the nation. Erica Bursler is the Director of Strategic Communications at Cosmolex. Erica's degree is in Business Administration, and she has over 6 years of experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small to mid-sized law firms. Erica has given numerous presentations across the country on legal technologies such as law practice technology management, cloud computing, and legal billing and trust accounting compliance. The presentation today will be followed by a Q&A. Please enter your questions into the question box in the webinar panel on the right side of your screen. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar and we will be sending out a video and the follow-up email in a few days. We'll also post a video on our blog at www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. So first off, I do want to cover a brief agenda of what we will be covering with today's topic. So first off, what are the components of accounts payable? And this is where we'll dive into items like managing your firm expenses, matter costs, third-party bills. We'll talk a little bit about those. And then we want to understand legal specific variations and what are some effective methods to navigate all of this. And a core trend throughout the presentation will be how can technology help you to stay on track? Now, in addition to describing these areas as well as some of the challenges, I will be utilizing Cosmolex to provide some visual examples. For those who may not know, Cosmolex is a web-based all-in-one legal practice management system, which includes billing, practice management activities, as well as business and trust accounting. So with that, let's go into a little bit of legal accounting. So we know that today's focus, of course, is about accounting. So let's break down the different components, and this is law firm specific accounting. So this breaks down into 3 areas, and we're not going to go really in depth into these areas. However, it is helpful to have an overall understanding of legal accounting, especially since accounts payable really does tie into each one of these in some way or another. So the business accounting, this is like your back office accounting. This is facility, payroll, office supplies. This is really accounting which is handled by all types of businesses. And you may be booking, expenses and income to your profit and loss, booking items to your balance sheet. That's pretty standard. However, law firms do have some unique aspects which come to matter management and those financials associated to it, which brings you into the next item, those matter costs and income accounting. You need to properly post client costs, cost reimbursements, and also the fee income and how that gets posted to the general ledger. And the last item is fee advances and retainer accounting. So that's dealing with managing client funds. You need to be able to keep track of all of the advances, whether it's operating or trust, that are handled by a particular matter. And this includes things like escrow funds or even personal injury settlements and the disbursement of those funds. So now that we have a general understanding of what makes legal accounting so unique, let's talk about accounts payable. So the definition of accounts payable is money owned by a company, what's owed out. In this case, it's your law office, what your law office owes. And law firms do have various unique scenarios for accounts payable, and these are what we will be discussing today. So you have things like office bills. These are your firm expenses that you're tracking, your own invoices that you need to pay. But there's also direct disbursements, which may likely are going directly from trust, just checks you're cutting straight from trust for your client. Matter costs, these are costs that need to be reimbursed by your client. And lastly, third-party bills. This is the management of your client's case-related bills. So we'll be going in depth into these 4 different items today, giving you a lot of different scenarios and information and some visual examples. So with that, we will start with our first item, which is office bills. So this, of course, exists across all businesses, managing your firm expenses, your office expenses, like your rent bills, insurance, maybe even office supplies. That's kind of your day-to-day, daily expenses that you need to worry about. And the traditional way to file these is to maybe just file the bill in a filing folder, pay when there's time, when there's money, or perhaps you have collectors that are hounding you for those payments. But that's traditional to any business. Even personally, you have these types of bills to pay. However, it is important to know that all the items that need to be tracked. You need to ensure you have a system in place that makes this process more efficient and helps you to properly manage your cash flow. So let's talk a little bit about navigating your office bills, that portion of accounts payable. So you need to ensure you are tracking your bill amounts, your due dates, and also any possible discounts or penalties that may be associated with those. You must also know when to pay those bills. Not all bills are created equal, and I'm sure you can agree on a business and a personal level. When you're paying certain bills, you need to prioritize those payments in order to properly manage your cash flow. Keeping your early bird discounts and late fees in mind will let you know what should be paid sooner rather than later. And having a hold concept definitely helps a lot in setting those bills aside to make sure they're not paid right away. That's very difficult to manage when you're using some sort of manual filing system or whatever the case may be in terms of those due dates and all this other criteria. Then when you're managing your vendors, a few tips are helpful. You want to keep their contact information handy so that when questions arise or if you have any issues, it's easy to locate who you need to speak with. But in addition to that, keep in mind that all of this interacts with your general ledger for your firm. So you want to be able to save the related general ledger account. For instance, if I'm paying the same person every month for rent, having a default, those types of transactions default to rent expense general ledger account is very helpful. It just streamlines the whole process. You're not having to think each and every time which account is this for. But you also need to track overall payments to your vendors for the current tax year, and that helps you with knowing what needs to be filed from a 1099 perspective. Any amounts over $600 do require a 1099 to be filed, unless maybe they're exempt or they've let you know that they're exempt. But being able to track this as you go will make your tax preparation much, much simpler. But it can be quite complicated if an automated system is not in place. And the last point is recurring bills. Many firms have monthly, quarterly, or even annual bills that are pretty much identical except for maybe the due date. Might be some sort of subscription or some recurring expense. And having the ability to memorize those bills so that you don't need to re-enter that information each time can be a big time saver, especially if you're utilizing some sort of software. You want the ability to kind of retain that information so you're not having to re-enter this each and every month, quarter, or every year. Okay, our second item to talk about is direct disbursements. So this is really one of the most straightforward payables for a firm. This is direct disbursements from trust. A good example of this would be, for instance, real estate. Usually you have the funds already there. You're just cutting a check for those particular expenses. Funds are already provided. And this does not have any direct impact on the firm's bottom line. So you may be wondering, well, what does this really have to do with me? I cut the checks and I move on. Well, there are a few things that you do need to keep in mind. Even though this is not the firm's money which is being spent, it is necessary to keep a close eye on the current trust ledger, meaning all the different transactions taking place, money in and out, but also the balance for each matter. You also need to be aware of the upcoming costs. What are you expecting to come in the future? And does the retainer that you have hold up to that? Perhaps it's going to deplete sooner than you thought. And that's why we always talk about evergreen retainers. You want to maintain them wherever possible. You want to be ahead of the game, anticipating when the retainer is going to deplete. That will allow you to seek replenishment before that money runs out. But you can only really anticipate that by knowing approximately how much you bill, how many expenses you're going to incur, so that you can really be ahead of that. Let's say you're not seeking replenishment and then you cut a check for a legitimate expense, but that results in an overdraft on that matter ledger. For that reason, it is essential to utilize a solution that has safeguards that prevent overdrafts from even happening. Because this, of course, when you're dealing with a trust account, that's a whole nother situation. You got to worry about auditors, regulators, asking why you've overdrafted. So making sure you're aware of the expenses that are taking place, always the ledger balances that are there, and clean records will make sure that you never end up in those situations. Our third type is matter costs. So matter costs are matter-related costs paid by the firm. So they will show up in your accounts payable as bills that you need to pay that's owed by the firm. However, you do need to pass those costs to the matter so that you will be reimbursed. So like I said, it's part of your accounts payable, but there's that extra step needed where it needs to be properly booked, billed, and even collected by the client. So a little bit about how to navigate when you're dealing with matter costs. First thing is this really is one of the main losses of income for firms. Expenses that are paid out of pocket and not properly passed through to the matter. So it is essential to ensure that all of these costs are posted to the matter so that you can get reimbursed. Otherwise, it's just money straight out of the firm, something that is completely preventable. So considering that this type of reimbursement combines both a transaction, which is accounting, and a billing entry. Solutions which integrate billing and accounting are really ideal for this type of situation. You may also have expenses that are attributed to multiple matters. Maybe you need to track the bill paid by the firm. Like let's say, for example, FedEx. That's a prime example. I get my monthly FedEx bill and I sent out, 10 different packages or postage, and it has to go to 10 different matters. Now I'm going to pay that bill. Likely I will pay it in full, but the portions need to be sent back to the individual matter so I can get reimbursed for those matter portions. There may even be some firm postage on there as well, but I need to be able to divide that up, know who needs to reimburse that, and have that pass through the matter right away when that bill is received, so that way it can get reimbursed as soon as possible. The last point here is directly linked to your cash flow management. Some bills you may want to hold until the client has covered that expense. So being able to manage which items are on hold, for how long, and for how much is really important in managing your overall cash flow. You may be able to prioritize what gets paid first, or if this could be automated in a system to say, hey, don't pay this right now, you need to wait for this to be paid. That could be a good red flag just to prevent that payment altogether. So I will quickly go into Cosmix to provide some visuals of what we've been talking about, specifically these office bills, matter costs, and really give you an idea of how technology can help in tracking all of this different type of information. Okay, so I jumped into my Cosmix program and I am in the accounting area right now. You will see right here. And I'm in this tab called Accounts Payable. So this is where you would manage those bills, those office bills that you need to pay, the firm is responsible for. So for example, I can add, I'll actually select one right here that I've added before. And let me just show you all that is listed here. So I can manage my bill date and my due date. The amount, of course, you need to know. The account in which this is attributed to, and of course you have the option to select from your entire general ledger account. But what's even more important are these few items down here. This is where things get really detailed. This is where you want to keep a close eye on prioritizing your bills. Is there a discount for early payments? Perhaps you want to pay that bill prior to others. Is there a finance charge or late fee for late payments? I know many businesses, sometimes cash flow may be a little bit low and certain things need to hold off. Well, you don't want to hold off the bills that have these finance charges or late fees. You'd rather do ones that don't. So it helps you to know when to pay what type of items. Now there is an option here to hold this bill payment. This is for, let's say I'm in that scenario where I want to pay this bill later. I don't want to pay it now. I can click hold, and that way I can't pay it right now. But even more important is if this is a matter expense. Okay, so we want to pass this through to a matter. This is a cost that needs to be reimbursed. So I have this option down here, post as matter expense. Now keep in mind, Cosmlex has the accounting and billing together. This is why you're able to do this functionality. So I can say which matter this is for, and I can create an expense card here. One other point I want to bring up. Notice this hold option has changed. So now it says hold bill payment until client invoice is paid in full. If you select that option, what it does is the accounting and billing actually communicate when that reimbursement is received. So that way you're not paying this bill. It will remain on hold until you receive that payment from the client, and then it will be released from hold automatically so that you can go ahead and make that payment with already having that reimbursement. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go into our fourth item, which is very unique. This is third-party bills management, and I'm going to pass that on over to Rick to continue.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. And so who would have thought that accounts payable, there could be so many variations which a law firm might need to worry about. And, accounts payable is part of accounting, legal accounting. And legal accounting itself, there are elements after elements in all aspects of legal accounting which are so unique to law firms, which requires unique education, unique way of doing things, making sure that your accounting and your accountants is not the same as what it does for a restaurant or a food business or a hotel or a motel or whatnot. The challenges and the compliance requirements lawyers have to worry about is fundamentally very different than many other service businesses. But coming back to accounts payable, right, the paying the bills part today. So just when you thought that you got everything about accounts payable and bill payment, comes the third-party bills. And this is a whole new element by itself, right? These are managing your client's bill pertaining to the case. And, for a layman's person, it might be like, why would I worry about it? We are not talking about, your client's rent or mortgage or, occasionally even that could be part of this play, but we're not talking about that. We are talking about cost which is related to the cases, which becomes contingent upon various things, contingent upon settlement, contingent upon that house being sold in the divorce case, and those bills very often comes to the attorney who is managing that case, right? So while you are not obligated to pay those bills, you are responsible to manage those bills. Why you are responsible? Because you are the one who is handling the settlement, right? So for example, a PI firm would be dealing with the client's hospital bills, doctor's bills, insurance bills, and all these bills are coming to the law firm so that all said and done, law firm can prepare a cost statement, a statement which contains their cost, third-party cost, including the costs which are not even coming to you, paid by third parties and whatnot. All that becomes part of that cost statement, which then gets presented and approved and signed off, and upon the settlement, the disbursement happens. So, while it is not quite related to the firm expenses or cost you are incurring on behalf of your client, the issues are the same. and a lot can go wrong. And my goal today in the next few minutes is to kind of give you a flavor of that what that managing third-party bills is, and how technology and how a systematic way of doing things can help you. Now, almost everything what Erica showed and what I'm showing here, sure, you can put all these bills in a folder and worry about it at the time of settlement, or you can start typing it in Excel or a spreadsheet or a Word document and worry about the settlement or worry about it some other time. It's possible, and you can do that. Would that be the right way of managing a small law firm? That's a question. Would that be compliant? Would that keep all your billing and trust accounting and these bills and everything all in one single unified way? Because, you know, too many times law firms think that billing is one problem and practice management is another problem and trust accounting is another problem and business accounting is another problem and these third-party bills is yet another problem, right? But these are highly interrelated. What you do in one area impacts the next, and that impacts the next one. And that's very crucial to understand. You can never win the battle of law practice management if you don't figure out a way to make sure that all these things are kind of moving together and in the right direction. So let's take a look at what's most important here, right? So the main goal here is that while you are not financially obligated to pay these bills, it is your responsibility to track these bills properly so that you can prepare the settlement statement properly, you can negotiate various bills as these PI cases and divorce cases are going on in a proper manner. And as I said, a lot can go wrong. So let's take an example of things which can go wrong with the third-party bills and quickly becomes a headache. The first and foremost is this, that you lose track of all your bills which have been submitted to you. Many of those could be liens on the settlement, and you disperse the settlement funds to your client too soon. And many times, and we hear this all the time, many times the end clients get a shock of their life when they learn how much other obligations have been accumulated. And once they learn that settlement of $150,000 and what's remaining after all the costs and fees is only $20,000, there's a major shock there. And it's important to keep track of that as you're going, and so that you have an idea about the total the liabilities which have been accumulated. So that's one problem which happens. The second issue could be is that if you don't have a total view, your own cost, the third-party cost, and all these bills which you're accumulating, and you are going to these settlement conferences and having these negotiations, well, that's going to be a problem too. You know, if for any reason you negotiate a lower settlement which doesn't cover all the bills, well, who's going to be responsible for those bills? And ultimately, how would you go back and fix the problems which happened to begin with? How would you go back to the parties and say, no, you know what, the settlement we negotiated, we need to rework that? I mean, that's not a good situation to be in. And preparation of your settlement statement, right, especially in these contingency cases where everything has to be meticulously documented for the approval and sign off and, you know, whatnot, becomes complex if things are not highly organized. So some of these things will go away if there is a proper setup to make sure that you know, you have everything properly typed up. Now there are additional variations. So this is not, you know, even within third-party bills category, you might have some more unique situations. One of the most common one is the amount you get billed versus amount which actually gets paid is very often different. You know, you get a lot of inflated bills. Many times there's not enough money to go around. Many times there are rules which you can write off, like for example Medicare or Medicaid bills, which you are allowed to write off certain percentages, and that percentage could be different in different jurisdictions and, you know, whatnot. So not only you need to track the original amount, you need to also track the original amount as well as what's being paid. So that's one thing you need to talk about that. You need to document your negotiations at all stages. Just like any good practice management will tell you that each and everything you touch upon, you want to write it down, you want to document with the cases. Bills may be paid by other parties. You got billed by a doctor and the bill actually is being paid by the insurance company, and that needs to be tracked too. You're not paying it, settlement is not paying it, insurance company is paying it. And to make it even worse, insurance company might actually bill you a lower amount because doctor might have billed $50,000, the contract rate is $10,000, insurance company is going to pay $10,000 to the doctor or to the hospital, and insurance company might bill back to the legal case $10,000, which they need to get reimbursed because they are not responsible for that accident. You see my point? I mean, it gets convoluted very quickly. And again, legal specific solutions and problem solutions which solve these issues might help you. And there might be disputes, things might be unfinalized, after the settlement. So, all these are variations which one way or other you'll need to track on that. Now, there are a couple of examples here. Like this is just a simple example about how on a cost statement, how you will track your costs. So firm's cost, where did you pay, which categories they belong to, and the amounts, and then totaling your own cost in different categories. And then on the same statement, there'll be a portion for the third-party cost, which is going to be these third-party claims you are getting, and again, their own categories, who the payees are, and what the claim is. And then all said and done, there's a total cost, your cost, third-party cost, and whatnot. So this is just a simple variation of what a cost statement might look like. But the goal today was to really talk about accounts payable. Let's look at from a technology perspective how these third-party bills can be managed.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So as he was mentioning, a big difference I showed before, matter costs and office bills, those are usually firm expenses or maybe expenses paid on costs on behalf of the firm that they're passing through. This is kind of the flip side of that. These are matter costs. These are like the expenses that the client is has, based on the case, like Rick was mentioning, contingency cases, personal injury, workman's comp, family law. A lot of times those situations come up, we need to track those costs that will eventually get paid from perhaps a settlement. So I'm going to just give you an idea as to how that gets set up or really how that functions. I'm going to jump into a particular case here. And there's a lot of factors to a particular matter, but today we're focusing on the banking, and this is that third-party bill. Now here is where you can take, let's say, that medical bill, that hospital bill, all those items that you are responsible for, the client also is responsible for, but will eventually get paid once the case is settled. So here's where you want to track things like the bill date, the due date, the amount, like any bill, of course. But then there's some other items down here to keep track of. What type of expense is this? That's the categories that we were talking about before. What was the original amount? If this is a negotiated bill, if you've kind of negotiated down the expense for your client, you want to track both what was originally billed and what you have negotiated that amount to be. You also want to notate if this was paid by another party. As was mentioned before, perhaps the insurance company is paying a particular bill. Well, you want to make sure that that's marked and it's stated who paid that bill. And really what this is doing is collecting this vital information, not only for you to have in front of you what bills need to be paid and be able to track those totals, but to generate that settlement statement that we just showed you, to be able to say to the court or to the client, hey, here are all the costs and expenses associated to this case. So while we may have a judgment for $1 million, we've had $500,000 in expenses that has to get paid. Therefore, the remaining part is then fee to the firm, and after that, the client. So the client gets paid last, but you need to have documentation as to what all is being tracked, and negotiate the settlement based off of that. One other point to bring in here is I can go ahead and add a bill here, no problem. But how does that bill get paid? It gets paid from the settlement or the trust account. So again, tying that into one system just makes everything much more simplified. So in addition to adding these bills and tracking them here, I can also pay them directly from the trust retainer that I have for that particular matter. So I have that full visual where I can track those bills, pay them, and also generate those proper settlement statements when needed. Okay, one thing I do want to point out before we wrap up today's presentation is many of the items we discussed today really become streamlined due to the fact that business accounting, billing, and trust accounting are all integrated within CosmoX. Of course, we're using CosmoX as a visual so you can get a sense of how everything works together, but it's crucial to know how these interrelate, how your office expenses eventually need to be posted to matters, and how there's matter bills that need to be tracked as well to pay from trust. So you have a lot of those three middle parts, business accounting, billing, and trust accounting, all interrelate as we talked about with those legal accounting components whenever you're dealing with your accounts payable.